Hi, I am Dr. Amanda Barton. I am a first-year navigator in Billiken's first chapter here at St. Louis University. I'm also part-time faculty in the University Core, which means that I teach Cura Personalis 1 sections and an Ignite seminar, which is based off of my research and current book project. I am also a SLU alum, and I previously taught in the College of Arts and Sciences. So I have a long history at St. Louis University. Billiken's first chapter was originally envisioned as contributing to diversity, equity, and inclusion here at St. Louis University, but I feel like it's a little deeper than that. Like, it's just a program can't fix all of the issues everybody encounters in an institution like St. Louis University. So that also looks like doing a lot of personal work. Myself, I carry a lot of privilege as a white woman. One of the things that I discovered later in my education was how much I did not have to engage with my own sense of my racial identity and that privilege. And so I've worked to build relationships with colleagues across all identities, but especially other white colleagues, to consider how we show up in spaces and how our actions may unconsciously continue our privilege, or how we may not be seeing how our privilege is benefiting us and hurting others. And it's a lot of work. At this point, I've been doing it for a while, so it's like I am able to be very self-reflective in my day-to-day life and my interactions, and thinking about where changes need to be made if we actually want to create an inclusive, welcoming environment here at St. Louis University. So some of those examples include outside of work, participating in focus groups specifically focused on the examination of white racial identity and our own privileges, and also making space to center other voices that aren't people who look like me. I grew up in a white working class community in northwestern Pennsylvania, so I grew up in the Rust Belt in the 80s. So I discovered as soon as I left home to go to college that my world was not as wide as I thought it was, and I never thought it was particularly wide. So as soon as I got to college is when I started to encounter people of races other than my own, people of other religions than my own. It was also a time of kind of falling away from the religion that I grew up with as I started to examine how structures and systems worked around me. But it wasn't really until I got into graduate school and I was doing my dissertation research, and I was very interested in the human body in literature. And as I started thinking about it and talking to some of my colleagues who were doing women and gender studies degrees, I was like, oh man, a lot of the stuff they're talking about in feminist theory sounds like it would really help me think more deeply about how we apply meaning to the human body. And so I decided to do a women and gender studies graduate minor, which was absolutely life-changing. Almost immediately, I was reading Black feminists and global feminists, and even just the way that feminist theory framed research in the world. It fundamentally changed how I thought, and whose voices I was listening to, and how I was approaching my research. And then I had the privilege of teaching in women and gender studies while I was working on my Ph.D. And then I continued on for a little while after I finished my dissertation. But I found that while I'd had lots of great epiphanies in my own classwork, it's very different walking with other people through that discovery process. And so teaching Intro to Women and Gender Studies, it required showing up for each of my students in different ways. It required, again, a lot of self-reflection about what assumptions I was bringing into each lesson. And also, as part of teaching women and gender studies, I got to teach some pathways courses, which Into SLU partners with different departments to create pathways courses. So there were times that 50% of the students in my classroom were from countries outside of the United States and had fundamentally different cultural experiences, which informed their understanding of gender and their own gender identities, and also didn't have the background in American history that some of the textbooks we were using assumed. And so that the process of teaching those classes really helped me get to the point where I'm at of continually realizing that creating inclusive spaces, reformation or restructuring requires both systemic rebuilding but also personal reflection about our experiences and our assumptions and our biases. My biggest advice is to be curious and to learn how to be vulnerable in your professional life. But really the only way, I think, to actually make changes and to create inclusive and welcoming environments is to start by being vulnerable and open to constructive feedback. And to realize that sometimes that constructive feedback can feel very uncomfortable. And especially as we're trying to create spaces that welcome more people, whether it's different races or ethnicities or different religions, cultivating the skills to be self-reflective and self-aware, and to create a network around yourself that supports you in that work, I think is super, super important. Because if you don't feel like you have the support to do that work, it can be very hard to actually create that welcoming space.